Hello everybody, how are you doing? So, this episode we're going to be talking about this book, Island by Aldous Huxley. Most people are familiar with Brave New World, which was the first Huxley book that I read. Very good. But this one, in contrast to Brave New World, which is sort of a dystopian, this is what I guess you might call a utopian novel. And he wrote it as sort of a response to Brave New World. So if you've ever read Brave New World, it's kind of a doomsday warning about all the horrible things that could happen in the future. Like, this is the direction that we're headed as a society. And it's a brilliant book, Brave New World, but it's scary, and it's all if everything went downhill and the government sort of exploded its power, and look at all the things that it's already doing to control us. This is all of that stuff taken to the extreme. With Island, he said, okay, we already know how things can go wrong. Let me try and figure out a solution. And so the book opens with the main character, Will Farnaby, who's an English journalist working as sort of not a spy, but like a scout for a large oil company that would like to start drilling on an island called Pala, P-A-L-A. And so he arrives on this island and by a shipwreck, and he breaks his leg, and they take him in, and they treat him, they nurse him back to health, but it takes a while. And so his time on this island of Pala, he's there to talk to the leaders and try and negotiate some terms with them. But he also really gets taken in with the way that they live, and he's really fascinated by their society. He's never seen anything like it. And so he asks to stay longer, and he says, can you have me as your, I don't know what the right term is, like your guest, so that I can learn more about your society. And that's not why he's supposed to be there, but he's fascinated with them. And so that sort of sets up, basically, it's basically a plot device. It gives Huxley the opportunity to tell us all of his ideas about what a ideal society would be. And so it's not much of a story, really, although the story elements really were good. I thought that the interactions between the characters, particularly him and a woman of the island named Susila, who just lost her husband, and Will just recently lost his wife, and the conversations that they had, I thought were really well done, very, very charming and touching. But as far as the story, that's about as as far as it goes. And it's basically a book of a lot of long conversations with him talking to Cecilia, talking to Dr. Farnaby, is a Scottish guy on the island who's been there, and he's a doctor. And they tell him about a lot of different parts of their society. So I'm going to go through a lot of the different elements, a lot of different topics that are discussed. So I guess I'll say this. So he ends up, when he's on his hospital bed, in between visits with people and conversations, he's reading this book, which is called What's What, I think. And it's a manifesto of the kind of the history of Paula and all of the things that they've decided to do for their society. And the Dr. Farnaby Sr., so some generations earlier, was a Scottish explorer, and he came to Paula, and he was a doctor, and he met the Raja at the time. It was like the ruler of Paula, and it's hard to say what ethnicity they are. It's there's a lot of Buddhism sort of seeped in, so and they talk about the Raja, which I think is Indian, so I think it's like Southeast or South Asian. But the Raja has a facial tumor, and it's really progressed bad. It's like going up into his eye socket and into his nose and down into the roof of his mouth, and he's in a lot of pain. And Dr. Farnaby Sr., the explorer, sees him and is like, I got to do something for this guy. And so a memory comes into his head about the idea of animal magnetism, which I just read about, and I think it was one of Freud's books or Jung or something. I forget who the guy was who came up with the idea of animal magnetism, but he was basically the founder of hypnotism. And Dr. Farnaby was like, I don't believe in that, but maybe that will work. And so he ends up trying it and successfully hypnotizes the Raja, and eventually goes through this very, very technical, invasive surgery, cutting out this tumor out of this guy's face while he's under hypnosis. Like, no anesthesia, nothing like that. He just hypnotizes him, and does the surgery, and it's wildly successful. And that's kind of symbolic for this meeting of two worlds, this sort of Buddhist spiritualism with the hypnotism and this Western science. And so because of this encounter that he has with the Raja, you've got this Scottish scientist, humanist, secular humanist, and this sort of spiritual guru Indian guy, and they form this deep friendship, and they decide, we're going to restructure the society of Paula, but we're going to take the best of both worlds. And so that's how this whole thing is framed. And so this is basically like Huxley being like, okay, what are the best? I don't know a whole lot about Aldous Huxley's background, but I know that he's a genius, and he's like amazingly well read, unbelievably smart, verbally fluent, and I think his interests go anywhere from all the different branches of science to religion to social behaviors to psychology. Just anyway, so he's basically like, let me just pick and choose the best things from all of the things that I know, and we'll put them together and create this society. And that's sort of the background. And so then Will has these conversations with people throughout the book, and they tell him about how they do things. And so one of the things that they talked about was families. People on this island have what they call MAC. Let me look up what it stands for. Mutual adoption clubs. And so kids aren't limited to just their biological parents. They have these mutual adoption clubs that when the kid gets frustrated with their parents, they can go see their uncle, or they can go see this other family, or they can go see this other family. And I'm not sure if I bought that as an idea. I mean, it's very idealistic. Like, I think maybe it could work, but like communes, it's sort of like that's kind of the idea behind a lot of communes is like everybody belongs to everybody, and we take care of each other. Um, and it doesn't really seem to work like on a large scale. Um, I don't know anyone who's grown up in a commune that was that sort of socially integrated that really like had a good child rearing experience. And I actually live in an Eskimo village. I've lived here. This is my 4th year here, and the culture is very similar to that. Partly because everybody's related, but it's very common to just go live with your auntie or go live with your grandma or go live with your uncle or something else, and it's like it takes a village to raise a child, and they take that literally here. And I'm not sure it's better for the kids. I mean, maybe it's not worse, but it seems very too wishful to think that that would work on a large scale. Like all the families in this mutual adoption club would have to be very committed. Anyway, but it's a book, so it's kind of a neat idea, I guess. So they talk about families. They talk about the technology that they've developed here on this island, which I thought was fascinating. I don't like. I want to research more about it to see if it's just science fiction or if there's some actual potential. But they they test the newborns very rigorously to figure out if they're going to grow up to be like an aggressive, overly aggressive physical person. And if that's the case, then they're like, okay, well, we can deal with that. We'll just make sure that they have hard physical labor for at least part of the day. And actually, everybody in Paula does at least an hour of physical labor first thing in the day. And I thought that was cool. The older I get, the more I'm realizing how important exercise is. I mean, it's good. Endorphins are good. I just got done working out actually, and it's unbelievably physically and mentally beneficial to exercise every day. You just feel centered. You make better decisions throughout your day. You have more energy actually. So that was cool. That was kind of like, not a entirely radical thought, but I was like, hey, that's cool. They also use this testing to. One thing they talked about that I should have read up on more before I decided to make this video, but they said we test to see if a boy will be a Peter Pan, which is apparently, according to this book, boys who don't grow up, don't mature at a normal rate that's biologically determined. And they talked a lot about Hitler and Stalin in that conversation and how they were both Peter Pans. And if they had and I forget what the solution was in the book Island. Like, okay, if he is a Peter Pan, what do you do with that? And this had a lot to do with the conversation about education, which I'm a teacher by trade, and I struggle a lot with the effectiveness of the educational system. But I also struggle figuring out, okay, obviously it's not ideal, like having kids sit in desks and all are told to do the same thing. Like, that's not what we should be doing. But what should we be doing? And there were some really good ideas in this book. So that was a really good section. He gets taken to one of the elementary schools in Paula, and he gets to sit in a classroom, And that's interesting because he goes to like a kindergarten classroom and the teacher is just doing these uh, mind exercises with the kids. And she's like, okay, I want you to close your eyes and imagine a bird. Now imagine two birds. Now make them green. Now make them yellow. Now they're all gone. Now they're back again. And she's developing their imagination. And Will is looking at this and he's like, what's going on? This is silly. And it gets explained to him. Um, they're learning how to develop their ability to make generate solutions and make problems disappear in their mind, basically. So, like, if you have this active imagination, this ability to control your imagination that's learned at a young age in school, then you deal with problems a lot better. And I thought that was interesting. I don't know how true that actually is, but I think maybe there's something to it. Um, and they talk a lot about hypnosis. So they have this other thing that they test for um, in the testing process, where some members of the population, it's like a small percentage, like 10% of the population, have the ability to self-hypnotize and go to a hypnosis state that is so deep that they can actually learn in a method where, like, if you go into this deep hypnosis state, time slows down for you, and so you can learn what would take a normal person a week to learn. You can learn that in like half an hour. And so it was kind of, I don't know if that's true or not. For what I know about like dreams and the unconscious and out of body experiences where people have like their whole life relived in like a second, like that's obviously true. Like that is a phenomenon that happens. But on the island, they've been able to harness that ability in a certain small subset of the population and exploit it for educational purposes. And these people go on to be great inventors and stuff because they're able to just educate themselves to an explosive amount in this sort of trance state. So that was really cool. I don't know if that's just pie in the sky stuff, but it was pretty cool. A lot of conversations about the different parts of society in this book. Another thing that they talked a lot about was spiritualism. So everyone in Paula is encouraged to develop their spiritual side. And I don't have a very good knowledge of Buddhism, but I think that a lot of the things in this book were, I think Huxley was pretty heavily influenced by Buddhism. And I'm just reading on the Wikipedia page, it's a specific type, Mahayana Buddhism. And they talk a lot in this book about mindfulness. Actually, there's these birds all over the island. They're parrots. Well, they're minor birds, but they can talk like parrots. And the guy, Farnaby, the original Scottish explorer, taught like 1,000 of these minor birds to say these slogans that are they have to do with mindfulness. And so the first thing that wakes Will up when he's shipwrecked and unconscious at the beginning of the book is this minor bird saying, "Attention, attention, attention." And a little girl explains to him, well, that's the thing that we forget the most, is to pay attention to the here and now. And so that's like modern, well, it's also ancient, but there's a lot of modern language around mindfulness and paying attention to the here and now without expectations. And so that's something that's talked a lot about. There's temples on the island that are people go to meditate. And they talk a lot about they talk a lot about sex in this book. which is funny because a lot of the things in this book is it's kind of like pie in the sky sort of to me. Like I'm skeptic. Like I really like this book, and the ideas are so charming, and it was a really good book, but to what's the word, to implement these practices on a societal scale, I don't know if you can do that, because it's like you can't build a society around meditation. You can't build a society around um, I don't know. Maybe you can, because a lot of people say that the family is the bedrock of our society, and I believe that actually. But these seem to be deeply personal things, like the meditation, um, the in the education, people are encouraged to pursue things that are deeply personally um, what they want to do. Um, but I don't know if like the government should have an involvement in that. But I don't know. It's more like he's not building a society, but more like a religion. Maybe that's a better way of looking at this book. But anyway, they talk a lot about sex, and how everyone in this book has a certain type of sex. Like they practice a certain sexual technique, which is called I'm going to butcher this, Maithuna, which they talk a lot about how, yeah, it's Maithuna, but that's like the Buddhism name for it. You might know it from the Roman Catholic practice of coitus reservatus, which is, I think it's basically just like make your sexual experience last as long as you can, like make love slowly, basically, which is actually a really good advice. um, Sorry, I'm being immature, but uh, it's funny that they talk about it so much, because it's a really big part of their culture. And Will Farnaby's like, well, what if they want to be a little bit more expressive? And it's like, well, they're free to do that, but most of them, they love this Mayushka thing. They're very enthusiastic about it, and it brings the couples closer together, and it was kind of cool. Uh, but it's funny that this is a utopian society, and it's one of the things that they talk about a lot is the art of lovemaking. Um, and so another thing that they talk about is psychedelics. They have this they have this thing called the moksha medicine, which is a drink that's produced from these yellowish mushrooms, which I guess are psilocybin mushrooms. And there's this ceremony that Will watches, where it's like the high school students on their graduation day. They do this dangerous rock climb. And so they climb up the face of this rock, and it's really hard. Um, and then they get to the top, and there's a statue of Krishna, I believe, up there. And they get to the top, and they all drink this moksha medicine and have this psychedelic experience while they meditate on the statue. Um, and and then after that, when they grow up, they can sort of take it at their own free will, but they're incorporating this psychedelic into their spiritual practice. And I've been learning a lot about psychedelics recently. I've been watching some of John Vervaeke's series Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, which is amazing. Actually, I want to know what he thinks of this book because I remember like he's going through this 50 episode series and he starts way back with like Socrates is his first one, and then he goes on to Aristotle and Marcus Aurelius and Martin Luther and Descartes and then he goes up into cognitive science and he's basically trying to do what Huxley did, and he's figuring out, okay, what we have this meaning crisis. We all are experiencing um, this void of meaning in our life. Why are so many people committing suicide? Why um, are so many people? It's anyway, and and then it's really good. It's a lot of it's over my head. I haven't done the necessary reading, I think, to understand most of the things that he's talking about. He's a genius. But he had this conversation with Paul Vanderklay where Paul was like, okay, what's your end goal? Do you have a solution for the meaning crisis? And he said, okay, well, I'm only on episode 30. I'm going to go to like 50, but we're going to get to that. But basically, and maybe I hope I'm not putting words in his mouth, but this is what I took away from it. I think what he said was, I'm going to try and take the best of all these different worlds: Buddhism, Christianity, cognitive science, shamanism, psychology, and sort of and build this community of all these people who are trying to find meaning and put it all together. And that's just what Huxley did. So it's anyway, with the psychedelics, apparently there is a psychedelic renaissance happening right now. Obviously, they're in the 60s. People are taking acid like crazy, and but in traditional shamanism practices, like ancient practices, people have been using mushrooms and peyote for ages. And I guess what it does is um, make like biologically, it makes different parts of your brain talk to each other that normally wouldn't, and so you see the world in a whole different way, that and in a way that is just vibrant with meaning. Um, and so they use this in the book to augment their spiritualism, which I don't know what I think about. I was obviously, well, you don't know me, but haven't done psychedelics. So yeah, interesting, very interesting, to say the least. Um, and all of this is contrasted in the book with consumerism. I think would be the main antagonist in the book, um, at least philosophically. So there's this scene where the young son of the current Raja, he's this like annoying little kid, um, who Will Farnaby is talking to, and he sort of sneaks up on the little kid, and he's reading this magazine, and Will's like, "Oh, what are you looking at there?" And he's like, "Nothing, nothing." He's like, "Oh, come on, like show me what is it, like a girly magazine, pornography? What's going on?" And he pulls it out, and it's this catalog for clothes, and like it's like a Sears catalog, and he's just like transfixed. And he didn't grow up on Paula, and so there's some. I'm not going to get into it with that character, but yeah, they're very against consumerism, which is cool. I really like. I see the dangers in consumerism, and um, it's it sucks meaning out of your life. And Huxley realized that. Um, So that's basically all of the ideas. I think the part, and I don't know if they're right. I think that they're really interesting. I don't know if they're actually implementable at a societal scale. The the island, they have no military, they have no defense, they're pacifists, and so I'm not going to spoil the ending, but there's it is too good to be true. It's not going to last. There and the final chapter was really I so anyway, that's what I would say about the ideas in this book. The part that I think stood out in my memory the most was the story element. And like I said, there's not so much of a story, but his relationship with Susila, the widow, um, really, there's a scene at the very end where, and throughout the book, he's been talking to her about his life and his ex-wife, his wife who died, excuse me, not his ex-wife. And he treated her very badly, and he cheated on her. And then she died in a car accident, and he has a lot of baggage. And Susila, in contrast, is a good woman, and her husband died in a rock climbing accident, um, going up for sort of a spiritual retreat. And for her profession, she's like a psychologist. So she hypnotizes people. There's a lot of hypnosis going on, and helps them work through their their problems. She's a really well done feminine character, and you just kind of fall in love with her in the book. And she's gentle and wise. Um, and in the last scene, she asks him, "Would you like to take the moksha medicine?" And he says yes, and he does. And and so he takes this psychedelic drink, and um, it's an amazingly written chapter. It's like an actual chapter explaining this sort of trance that he goes into. And I've heard it said that like you can't explain a psychedelic trip, like it's impossible unless you've done it. You're basically would be speaking Greek, but I feel like Huxley does it here, and he makes it um, it he makes it it's really well written. Um, and the whole time Susila is sort of guiding him through it, and she's like, okay, what do you see, and then she puts on Bach's like Fifth Symphony or something so that he can listen to this music. She's like, what do you hear? And she's like, okay, now open your eyes. And he sees this lizard there that's got this bright red throat, and it like freaks him out, and he goes into like this, like he sees the horror of the world of creation, even though it's so bright and vibrant. And he sees two praying mantises mating, and the when mantises mate, the female will eat the male as they're mating, and he sees that while he's tripping on shrooms. It's the like it's funny, but the way he describes it, you just like feel the horror. But she guides him through that too. And there's a scene where she takes his face in her hands, and puts her thumbs on his eyes, and it's scary because he's in this vulnerable position, and he thinks for a second maybe she's going to gouge my eyes out, but she doesn't. She's like, what do you, and she guides him through this mindfulness thing, like, what do you feel? Focus on the here and now, pay attention, and the mina birds are saying attention in the background. And gosh, it's not romantic, but I've never read a scene, I don't think, that had that much intimacy and loving um, interaction between two characters before. It just really stood out to me. So I I think I was pretty affected by this book. I need to reread Brave New World, because that's sort of the other side of the coin. But yeah, give it a go if you haven't read Island. I actually listened to this one as well, so I've been cheating a lot and doing the Audible thing. But there's a really good version on Audible, narrated by Simon Vance. Really well done. It's an easy to listen to, and yeah. So that's Island by Aldous Huxley. Thanks.